Hi, I'm Emily. It was just another long night at the diner, wiping down tables and balancing trays heavier than my sleep-deprived eyelids. Between shifts at the diner and my weekend gig at the bookstore, I was barely scraping by, doing what I could to keep my head above water. College wasn't cheap, and while my classmates obsessed over grades and party plans, I was counting pennies and sacrificing sleep. My life hadn't always been this balancing act between jobs and studies. Growing up, I was the apple of my father's eye, or at least I thought I was. But everything changed when my mom passed away. Not long after, my dad, Richard, married Clarissa, a woman closer in age to me than him. She was always draped in clothes and jewels, desperately trying to appear younger. Since then, home felt more like a battleground than a sanctuary. I was told my college tuition was covered by the trust fund my mom had set up for me, a final act to secure my future. But by my sophomore year, financial cracks started to show, and I began picking up more shifts. I told myself it was just for extra book money or a little cushion for emergencies. Then, everything came crashing down on a chilly Thursday morning. Between classes, I got a call from Mr. Thompson at the bank. His voice was calm, professional, but the weight of his words made my knees buckle. "Miss Tyler, there's an issue with your tuition payment. It seems there are insufficient funds in your account." "Insufficient funds?" I repeated, my voice shaky with confusion. "That can't be right. Can you check again? It's supposed to be covered by my trust fund." "There's been significant activity in the account," Mr. Thompson explained, his tone sympathetic. I hung up, my mind racing. Significant activity? Depleted? These weren't words that belonged to a fully funded trust. Something was very wrong. That evening, I confronted Richard over dinner. The dining table felt less like home and more like a boardroom as I laid out the facts. "Dad, there's a problem with the trust fund. The bank says my tuition hasn't been paid because there's almost nothing left. Do you know anything about this?" Richard's eyes flicked to Clarissa, who was pushing her food around her plate without interest. After a tense pause, he sighed, his mask of ignorance slipping. "Emily, I had to use some of that money. We had expenses, and I thought I could replace it before you noticed." "Expenses?" I repeated, my anger rising. What expenses could be worth risking my future? Clarissa spoke up then, her voice cold and dismissive. "Life isn't just about your tuition, Emily. We have needs too." I stood abruptly, my chair scraping the floor. "This isn't just about needs, Clarissa. It's about trust. Something that clearly doesn't matter in this family." That night, with a heart heavy from betrayal, I packed a bag and left. I couldn't stay in that house with the truth hanging in the air like smoke. I moved in with a friend, determined to find out how my future had been sold off for Clarissa's jewels and Richard's lies. The following days turned into weeks, and each passing moment deepened the weight of my father's betrayal. My trust fund, my future, had been bled dry, not for emergencies, but for lavish, unnecessary indulgences. The realization lit a fire in me, and I was determined to uncover every deceitful transaction Richard had made. Between jobs and classes, I combed through bank statements and financial records, slowly piecing together the truth. The withdrawals lined up with Richard's shopping sprees and high society events with Clarissa, flaunting their wealth while my future crumbled. One evening, when I knew Clarissa wouldn't be home, I confronted Richard again. The bank statements lay on the coffee table like an indictment as I waited. When Richard walked in and saw the papers, his usual composure cracked. "What is this, Emily?" he asked, his voice teetering between defiance and fear. "You know exactly what this is," I replied, my voice steady, ready to face the truth. Despite the turmoil churning inside, I kept my voice steady. "Look at these numbers, Dad. Look at what you've done." Richard picked up a statement, his eyes scanning the damning figures. Slowly, he set it down and sank into a chair, his posture deflated. "It was supposed to be temporary," he mumbled, his voice low, heavy with regret. "I thought I could make it right before you ever found out." "Temporary?" I scoffed, the bitterness in my voice cutting through the air. "You gambled with my future. How could you ever think that was okay?" For a fleeting moment, Richard's eyes met mine, and I saw a glimpse of the man who had raised me, the father I once admired. But that flicker quickly faded under the weight of his actions. It was all for her, wasn't it? All for Clarissa, I pressed, needing to hear him say it. "Yes," he whispered, the admission hanging between us like a heavy fog. I stood up, the chair scraping loudly across the floor. I trusted you, Dad, and you chose her happiness over your own daughter's future." Without another word, I walked out, the door closing behind me with a finality that echoed my resolve. That night, lying in a small room I now called home, the weight of my broken family ties pressed down on me. Cutting communication with Richard was painful but necessary. Each time my phone rang, I ignored it. Every unanswered message was a reminder that I needed space, a plan, something public and irreversible that would dismantle the facade Richard and Clarissa had built. As the dawn broke over another sleepless night, an idea began to form. A plan that would not only expose Richard's betrayal but humiliate Clarissa in the process. The perfect setting. The upcoming charity gala, where they always basked in the spotlight. It was only a week away, and everything was coming together more smoothly than I had dared to hope. My unlikely ally in this scheme was Sarah, once Clarissa's close friend but now a scorned exile who had felt the sting of betrayal just as deeply as I had. We spent countless nights huddled over my laptop in her cramped living room, piecing together evidence of the lavish expenditures that had drained my trust fund. Each transaction traced back to a specific piece of jewelry that Clarissa flaunted on social media. The paper trail was irrefutable. Bank statements, receipts, and photos of Clarissa draped in jewels at high society events. "Imagine her face when everyone knows the truth," Sarah said one evening, a mischievous spark in her eyes. "I don't want to imagine it," I replied, my resolve hardening. "I want to see it." The night of the gala arrived, my nerves buzzing with anticipation and determination. Dressed in a simple but elegant black dress, I entered the venue, my eyes scanning the crowd for Clarissa and the blogger I had contacted, Lisa, a sharp-eyed woman with a reputation for exposing the hidden scandals of the city's elite. As expected, Clarissa was dripping in diamonds, jewels bought with the feature that had been stolen from me. Seeing her stirred a mix of anger and resolve. I spotted Lisa across the room and approached her discreetly. "See the necklace and earrings?" I whispered, nodding toward Clarissa. "They're supposedly gifts from her loving husband. But there's more to that story." I handed Lisa a folder filled with the evidence Sarah and I had gathered. Lisa's eyes widened as she flipped through the documents. "This is gold," she murmured, already pulling out her phone, likely planning her next steps to break the story. As the night wore on, Sarah and I watched from the shadows as Lisa subtly pointed her camera at Clarissa, capturing the diamonds that now glittered with deceit. She mingled among the guests, weaving the real story into conversations. Rumors began to ripple through the crowd like wildfire. When Lisa finally posted the exposé online, complete with photos and irrefutable evidence, the reaction was immediate. Guests whispered, their eyes darting between their phones and Clarissa. The room buzzed with the energy of scandal, the air thick with shock and schadenfreude. Richard's face turned pale as he read the breaking news on a guest's phone, his eyes locking with mine from across the room. In that moment, the carefully crafted facade of the doting husband shattered, leaving behind only the raw guilt of a man who had gambled and lost everything. Clarissa's reaction was even more dramatic. She clutched her necklace as if it could protect her from the judgment crashing down around her. But the jewels no longer sparkled with luxury. They glittered with lies and theft. As the evening came to a close, Richard and Clarissa hurriedly left the gala, avoiding the eyes of their former friends and allies. Sarah gave my shoulder a reassuring squeeze, a silent acknowledgement of our victory. That night, as I lay in bed, the adrenaline slowly ebbed, and for the first time in months, I felt a wave of true relief. The truth wasn't whispered in corners, it had been shouted from the rooftops. I hadn't exposed their deceit for revenge, but for justice, to reclaim my future and prove it was no one's to gamble with but my own. The aftermath of the gala was swift and unforgiving. By the time the sun rose the next morning, the story of Richard's misuse of my trust fund, spurred by Clarissa's greed, had spread across every local news outlet. Lisa's blog post, armed with the evidence Sarah and I had uncovered, went viral, shared by those hungry for both scandal and justice. Richard's once impeccable reputation crumbled under the weight of public scrutiny. Professional relationships that had taken him decades to build evaporated overnight, with colleagues and business partners distancing themselves, unwilling to be associated with his deceit. His once tight social circle unraveled as friends turned their backs, condemning his actions. But the consequences didn't end with social ostracism. The trust fund, meant to support not just my education but the future of other family members, had been compromised. Upon learning of the breach, my aunt and uncle, whose children were also beneficiaries, filed a lawsuit against Richard, seeking reparations for the misallocated funds. The ensuing legal battles drained whatever sympathy anyone might have had left for him. As for Clarissa, the backlash shattered her social standing. Humiliated and shunned by her peers, she found her position in the community untenable. With her image tarnished beyond repair, she left Richard, seeking refuge far away from the judgmental eyes of those they had once mingled with. Meanwhile, an unexpected silver lining emerged. The community, touched by my story and impressed by my resolve, rallied behind me. Local business owners and residents set up a community fund to help cover my tuition and living expenses. Their generosity was overwhelming, reminding me that for every act of deceit, there is often an act of kindness. Thanks to their support, I was able to return to my studies, free from the financial burden that had once weighed so heavily on me. I moved into a small apartment, modest, but mine, and reveled in the independence it offered. It was a fresh start, a space that symbolized my freedom from the shadows of betrayal that had once loomed so large. Through it all, I had learned the value of self-reliance and the importance of holding those we love accountable. The betrayal I experienced was deep and painful, but it taught me resilience and the power of standing up for what is right. With the support of my community and my own newfound strength, I embraced my studies with renewed passion. I was no longer just surviving, I was thriving. Every step I took was a testament to the power of truth and the enduring spirit of a woman determined to reclaim her future. And now my story was no longer about what had been lost. It was about everything I had gained.